Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Syriana Analysis. It's 9 p.m. Central European Time, and I'm joined by Stephan Ossenkopp. He is a researcher at Schiller Institute, and he will help us today to understand the foreign policy of Germany toward the Russian-Ukraine war. And in my opinion, this is a very important topic that I myself am interested in, and I would like to understand the complexities and the lots of criticism that is nowadays the German government is targeted by this criticism for its policy, and some they say they don't have a choice and they had to pursue the national security interests. Thank you, Stephan, for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Actually, guys, just before I start this conversation, I just want to mention that yesterday I told you about the crowdfunding on GoFundMe.com, and unfortunately, the GoFundMe platform suspended temporarily our campaign to collect donations for humanitarian purposes in Syria. We have collected around 15,000 euros in less than 12 hours, and unfortunately, the platform suspended it temporarily, and they're asking so many questions and so many documents and evidence, etc. I am trying to solve it. If I solve it, the money will go to the people in need in Syria. If I couldn't, the GoFundMe will return the money that you have donated to your bank account. Now, it's been almost a year to the Ukraine war, although the hostilities began right after the 2014 coup d'etat in Kiev, right? Now, former German Chancellor Merkel was one of the guarantors of the Minsk agreement in 2014 and 2015, which stated, for example, dialogue on interim self-government for Donetsk and Luhansk in accordance with the Ukraine war and acknowledgement of special status by parliament, constitutional reform in Ukraine, including decentralization, with specific mention of Donetsk and Luhansk, among other points. While the agreement has not been implemented and the hostilities continued after 2014 and 2015, which led to the current Russian offensive on Ukraine, Merkel stated recently that the Minsk agreement wasn't meant to be implemented, but rather to give Ukraine the time to be ready for war. Now, do you really think that Merkel is genuine in her statement that it was only to buy time for Ukraine, or did she feel huge pressure by the current politicians or the ruling elite in Germany who blamed her for having at least not bad relations with Russia and striking this deal between Ukraine and Russia?
Well, whatever her motivations were, the damage that she has done by saying this is terrible. Everybody in Russia now thinks there is nobody in the West to negotiate with. Germany was probably a little bit closer than Great Britain, at least, and Merkel was certainly closer to had a more trusting relationship with Putin than most of the British prime ministers like Theresa May or Boris Johnson or the Americans. So it remains an open question. What was her motivation? Did she want to basically give a signal to NATO and the West? I'm on your side. You stop criticizing me because I've been trying to negotiate or find an equal balance between Western interests and Russian interests. Or did she really deceive Russia and Putin personally for more than 8 years? Whatever is the case, if this is the case, she should clarify it because she hasn't said anything afterwards. There was only another interview given by François Hollande, who was also a guarantor. They both guaranteed the Minsk Accord and the United Nations Security Council resolution. They basically gave a guarantee for international law, which was a very serious thing. And if they have betrayed that, and Hollande said, yeah, she's right, that's exactly how it was meant. We needed to militarily strengthen Ukraine, and this is also what came out of an interview of a very knowledgeable person, which is a German General Harald Kujat, who was the chairman of the NATO military commission, and he was in Ukraine, and he said, of course, Ukraine was armed at least since 2017. So this is a huge deal. And when Putin was asked in Bishkek, he said, who are we supposed to negotiate with? Some people now saying, oh, Putin doesn't want to negotiate. But, from their perspective, who is there to trust now after this deception?
But in your opinion, which possibility is more, which possibility is more probable? The possibility that she deceived Russia, or she's now trying to make an impression to the NATO side that she's still an ally for them?
Well, this is maybe a question for people who want to weigh the pros and cons of such an utterance. But the damage is already done, and now if she has deceived Putin for 8 years, then she is really wicked and has an evil intention. I don't exactly know. I think she should be pressured to go to the press or clarify what she actually has done to make this clear, because it does make a huge difference. Looking at her and looking at her legacy. But the damage is already done, and now the danger is very clearly there that the situation escalates into a total confrontation between NATO and Russia, including, nuclear confrontation, because both sides are seeking the solution on the battlefield. Russia for the explained reasons, because they don't think that there's anybody in the NATO and Europe or in the United States to negotiate with. And on the other side, you have these people like Boris Johnson running around in Kiev saying, yeah, we're going to train so and so many thousand Ukrainians. We're going to deliver so and so many 100 tanks. We're going to get back the Crimean Peninsula, etc. So this is a very dangerous situation. I'm only happy that there are two initiatives that are really very helpful. That's the initiative of Pope Francis, who has reiterated several times that he would talk to both, to Zelensky and Putin, to negotiate a peace within the Vatican. And recently, when Chancellor Scholz visited Brazil, and he had a press conference with Lula da Silva. Lula da Silva said, "Yeah, we're not going to you're not going to give you ammunition for the anti-aircraft tanks, and we're not going to join your so-called climate club, but we are going to propose a peace club, like a G20 for peace." And he will speak with China, with India and Indonesia and many other countries. I think that's something we should support.
But the German side recently decided to deliver Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Do you think Berlin came under tremendous pressure to send the tanks, or it was a conscious decision based on Germany's own geopolitical and national security interests?
This was probably a lot of pressure. I mean, when you compare Scholz's position from the very beginning, where he said, we're not going to deliver weapons, or heavy weapons for that matter, because this will increase the danger of war, of world war, he has completely changed his position. And also the former defense minister, Lambrecht, changed her position, especially when they had this meeting of the so-called Ukraine contact group at the Ramstein military base, one of the largest US military bases in Europe. And they went in with one opinion, and then, they were joined by Lloyd Austin and Blinken and other people, probably Stoltenberg, etc. And then they came out and had another opinion, a different opinion, and said, yes, it's necessary. We can deliver weapons. At that time, it was not the Leopard tank. The Leopard tank came just recently, and it was under enormous pressure by the Americans, but also from the Poles, from the Baltic countries, from NATO, and probably from many others. And after the Ramstein meeting, which was the third Ukraine contact group meeting, there was a short period of hesitation, but and he hid sort of behind the question, I only do it with the Allies. I only do it when the Americans are delivering their Abrams tanks, and the Americans had first ruled out to send them. And so maybe it was just a charade, maybe it was just a charade on the American side, on the Scholz side, to give the impression that, everything was going according to their own set of mindset. But in the end, this pressure actually showed the effect, and the effect is really devastating. Now the Russians, especially the extreme faction, have another argument to say, look, the West is evil. They're sending tanks like 80 years ago to the Battle of Stalingrad, etc. They're going to, they want to kill Russians, etc. So this is a very terrible development. And remember, the British were number one. They said we were going to deliver these Challenger 2 tanks, etc. So in all of this scenario, if we look at it, it's not the Germans who are, jumping in the forefront. It's mostly the British, and then under a lot of pressure, the Germans are following. But they have no principled. The German government has no principled position. They should say no and stick to the no decision and go for negotiations. But there are no initiatives for negotiations, which is very tragic.
Yeah, interestingly, however, one of the parties that exerted huge pressure on Olaf Scholz was the Green Party, right? And their motto during the 2021 election was "No weapon export to war zones." This was Annalena Baerbock's her own motto as well. How did the Green Party end up as the war party? They call it the war party now. If you go to Twitter and type Kriegspartei, you will see that all the results are about the Green Party.
Because they are the Kriegspartei. They are the war party. If they had roots in the anti-war movement or the anti-nuclear energy movement, then these roots are completely severed and cut off. I mean, we know a couple of founding members of the Greens, and they are horrified. They're saying this is not what we wanted. We were against NATO. We were, as you said, against sending weapons into conflict zones. This has changed. The first step of change was basically with the NATO bombing of Serbia, of Yugoslavia, where the Greens played a very decisive role in the Red-Green coalition at the time, especially Joschka Fischer, the foreign secretary, gave a lot of speeches saying, there's a genocide and we don't need a United Nations resolution to start a preemptive military action. He was using the same argument that British Prime Minister Tony Blair had used at many of international meetings, including a NATO meeting, I think, in Chicago, where he said there is a responsibility to protect, and out of this was a whole doctrine was developed, that you can start a war without adhering to international law if there is an urgent situation like a genocide taking place. But what if you just make up a genocide, and you just make a media campaign of a genocide, and then you start a war, and because nobody can give you the proof, but afterwards it was too late. The whole country was destroyed, and the same thing is happening now with Ukraine.
It's also happening in Syria, not in terms of genocide, but the Green Party is one of the biggest supporter of the so-called rebel groups in Syria, and the Greens call, for example, Idlib, which is the largest safe haven for Al-Qaeda terrorists, according to the Pentagon itself, they call, I quote, the last bastion for democracy in Syria. How the Greens ended up supporting a regressive far-right Islamist group in Syria? Do they really consciously support the Islamists, or are they misled?
I think it's a mixture. Maybe a lot of people are in the leadership of the Greens, like Baerbock, like Habeck, And like Ralf Fuchs, who is a very strange person. He started out as the communist, basically, the so-called um, West Germany had so-called communist groups. Most of them were Maoists, etc. And they said, we are supporting the Cultural Revolution of Mao. And then they wanted to do the long march through the institutions, because that was their aim. Their aim was to go into leadership positions to basically push through their policies, which are not, maybe in the beginning they did say we want a war against Russia, but they basically have a very anti-humanistic outlook. The basic philosophy of the Greens is not peace and human development. It's basically Malthusianism. That human beings are just a nuisance to the safety of the planet. The balance, between nature and man is out of control. We need to reduce populations, etc. So, starting from that, these people went into leadership positions like, Ralf Fuchs and Joschka Fischer, and there are other people who really went into the planning staff of the foreign ministry. But they are terrible. These are just terrible people, and so they end up supporting something absolutely terrible. Terrorist organizations, and but they disguise it basically as supporting some kind of a freedom fighter group, or a movement for democracy, or a movement against dictatorship, etc. So this has come very far, and I think we should actually spell the end of these Greens and show what they are doing, expose what they are doing, as you have been doing, and you will still do in the future. Because we have to get rid of them. Germany needs a completely different policy outlook. Unfortunately, all the other parties have taken over a lot of the same policies. For example, the Greens want to pushing this hoax of the Xinjiang Uyghur genocide, but the other parties, like the Green Party, the Yellow Party, the Liberals, have taken it over. The Christian Democrats have taken it over. A lot of Social Democrats and Left Party have taken over the same policies. So actually, Germany is in a situation where the entire spectrum of political organizations, including social organizations, are really on the completely wrong paradigm. And we have to bring Germany to a complete turnaround and a complete change. And they should actually cooperate with groups like the BRICS group, or with the New Silk Road or the Belt and Road Initiative, cooperate with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. These are institutions that are already going in the complete opposite direction for development, talking to each other on an equal level, mutual respect, and non-interference into the internal affairs. And this is a process. I don't know exactly how in what time frame we can change Germany, but I think a lot of people now realizing and waking up that the Greens are an evil, a sinister organization, that their policies are wrong, and that any further escalation against Russia and decoupling from China would be a complete doom for Germany.
Actually, I just want to make a follow-up on the Green Party. I truly believe the Green Party in Germany is the worst political party among the existing political parties that are in the parliament, in the Bundestag itself. This is just my objective opinion based on personal experience with them, and also with their policies toward my country, Syria, their policy toward Azerbaijan, Armenia, recently, and their policy now toward Ukraine. There are two big files that I can see in front of my eyes, that how the Greens are dealing with these issues. And the hypocrisy speaks volume in all these three cases. If you just sit and address each of these cases, you will see a very high level of hypocrisy in their statements and in their actions in these different conflicts, because what they preach is peace and what they do is war, and what they preach is democracy, but they're supporting regressive groups, and what they always criticize anything on the right of the Green Party, and they call them neo-Nazis, fascists, etc. And they're the ones supporting the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. So I really don't know who is the real neo-Nazis here. And to be honest, I have so many colleagues from the university days who are now in Germany. They live in Germany. They applied for asylum, and they were adopted, let's say, by the Green Party. I don't have any problem. Anyone should have his own political opinion. But when you embrace a type of people who are truly regressive in their values, and they don't believe in any kind of empathy, any kind of democratic values in the family system, for example. If I'm a person and I have a sister, for example, and I say, if my sister goes out with another man, I would murder her. And then you go to the Green Party and say, look, I'm a democratic revolutionary from Syria and I want to bring democracy and human rights. And when the Greens embrace them, they're either one of the two options. They're either really misled or they are consciously adopting these people, which I believe it doesn't take a genius to discover the truth of this type of Syrians. After a few years, they're already living in Syria, and you can see from their actions, from their behavior, and from their social interaction. But I'm the one who is evil in their eyes, and the rest are the good ones who preach true hate. And this leads me to believe that really the Greens, they are full of hatred. They're full of toxic. They're really toxic, and they cannot discuss. Every time I try to discuss like a activist or a politician from the Green Party, they don't have an argument except calling you a fascist, and then they called me a self-hating Syrian. I don't understand all these labels where they come from, and I truly believe that anyone who resorts to such technique lacks logic and lacks argument. Otherwise, if you have an argument, just counter my argument and let's have a civilized conversation in this regard. And today, Annalena Baerbock, she made a statement about the earthquake in Turkey and in Syria, and she said they're going to send aid to Turkey. She named Turkey as Turkey. They're ready to send the millions of aid to Turkey. But for the Syrian Assad regime, she says that he cannot even help his own people after the disaster. We're going to make sure to send aid to one or two humanitarian organizations. And I know these humanitarian organizations, they don't work in government held areas. And we have to know that it's very important to send aid to the non-government held areas, the militant held areas, because they're civilians and they are in dire need for help. But what about the vast majority of the Syrians who live in government held areas? And you say, no, we're going to send it to these NGOs who work in Idlib and work in northern Syria. And there is no even mechanism to see where is this aid going to. I mean, when you send all these millions of aid to Idlib, do you really think that Al-Qaeda, which controls Idlib, is going to just leave all this aid to go and be distributed to the people? We know this with experience. In Eastern Ghouta, for example, Jaish al-Islam, they had bunkers and bunkers and bunkers of food, medicine, and all sorts of aid that they were receiving from these so-called NGOs, and they were storing them underground for themselves. But when they lost the war and the Syrian army liberated the area, and they digged into these bunkers, and they found tons and tons and tons of humanitarian aid from Western countries, all stored in these bunkers, in these storages, by the service groups. And now it's happening the same. So I really question their intention and their motive by sending only to the areas controlled by, who is controlling Idlib? It's Al-Qaeda, it's the Uyghurs, it's the Turkestani army, Tajikis, Saudis. Those are the people controlling this area. So I hope that this aid goes to the civilians and not to the militants. That would be at least a little help for the Syrians living there. Now, if we go back a little bit to the Ukraine case, Brzezinski says that America's interest is stopping the conglomeration between Russia and Germany, because the US nightmare is Russian natural resources and manpower getting along with Germany's technological and industrial sector. This will end America's supremacy in Eurasia, and Germany will not need to be in NATO again. Do you believe this is what the Americans are doing nowadays to Russia and Germany? And are German politicians aware of it?
I think that Brzezinski, who was one of the founders of the Trilateral Commission, is not speaking for the United States as, it was founded on its constitution, and because the United States used to be, from its Declaration of Independence and its liberation war against the British Empire, it used to be an idea of Europeans to create a nation, basically a sovereign nation state. And unfortunately, United States was largely subverted. I mean, the original idea of the United States was largely subverted by bankers, especially by London bankers who opened up this branch called the Wall Street, and there's also the Vault in Boston. And a lot of Anglophile individuals, institutions who thought, okay, if we cannot bring back our former colonies in a military way, we can sort of subvert them and bring them back into our fold by changing their culture, buying their politicians, creating a situation where more and more people will believe that that what's good for them is basically to be a power that subjects other nations. So this happened especially after World War II, when Churchill went to Truman and said, we should form an Anglo-American world system. He didn't say empire, but basically he was talking about the British Empire lining up with their American cousins or sisters and brothers. I don't know what he said, but you should really check his speech and say we should militarize the United Nations and control the world. That's what he said. And I think that a lot of Americans, at the time, for example, just came home from World War II and they didn't want to object to their government, and they became very silent. And so when it was the British who actually advocated throwing the 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, while Japan was already in negotiations for capitulation. So we shouldn't, there's the United States as the founding idea, and then there's basically the leadership of the United States, like Brzezinski, who are pursuing a different agenda, an imperial agenda, and they're just using the United States as a military power to control the world, by, they have, I think, erected 700 to 850 military bases encircling Russia, China, and all other kinds of countries. But they also use the dollar, to basically create genocide. I mean, Syria wouldn't be in that position that it is right now if the Congress hadn't created the so-called Caesar sanctions. And under these sanctions is impossible to import the most basic amenities and healthcare products that the people need. These sanctions are completely evil and they have to be abandoned. I think that a lot of German politicians, you were talking about German politicians, might be aware of this, but they think, this is a huge, powerful system. We cannot, as individual politicians, go against it. So most of them, I think, are either in the pockets of this Anglo-American dictatorship, this NATO dictatorship, who wants to become now global NATO, or they're corrupt, or maybe many of them are evil, like this guy, like this person. I'm saying guy, but she's a woman, Strack Zimmermann. She's an FDP, like a liberal politician. But whenever somebody is supposed to be destroyed with a different opinion, especially on the Ukraine war, they bring her. You see, she looks like a guy, and anyway,
I really no offense to her. I really no offense. But when I first read the name and saw the photo, I thought he's a guy, and I had to Google it to know if she's a woman or she's a man.
So that's why I made the mistake twice saying him. But whenever somebody has a different opinion, even if he or she is from the mainstream, and saying, look, there are reports from the OSCE, which is us, saying that there have been shellings by Ukrainians on the Donbass, then this Jacques Zimmermann woman, she jumps in and says, yeah, but do you want, to support a genocidalist dictator who is, killing children every day or eating them for breakfast? So they have these people to put enormous pressure on anybody here who is not of the same opinion but wants to discuss rationally. This is not possible. There's no rational discussion. I know a lot of people who tell me, I have a different opinion, but I will not say it. And the population, they're trying now to form a peace movement. There is a lot of activity. The German population knows about this. They are not passive, but they are a little bit timid because they know they are being watched. The internal intelligence service has already their head or chief has already given a lot of speeches saying that whoever goes on the streets against sanctions or for negotiations or to end the war is basically in the pocket of the Kremlin. And so this is not a democracy anymore here. People should be aware of this, and I think we should we have to change this. Germany is in a very terrible condition right now.
Actually, I don't want to comment on this because I don't want to put myself in a trouble. I have enough troubles with them, and they actively try to destroy my reputation, to destroy my career, to destroy everything that I have built here in Germany. And I'm not a German, so my situation is a little bit vulnerable here. And it's just a simple words. They don't really respect other opinions, and they really try to destroy you. And the difference between here and in a place like Syria, for example, if you really challenge the system in Syria, they throw you in jail, like there is physical jail. And if you really challenge the narrative here and challenge the system, they will put you in an invisible prison. They will wage a character assassination against you. They will destroy your reputation. You will never find a job again in your life when they do that. So it's like some sort of a character assassination. They tarnish your reputation. And if you work in the public field, you're done. You no more can find a job let's say a job that you can afford the living here in this country. So it's a really difficult situation for those who want to challenge the system. But those who are calling for negotiations and calling for peace treaty between Ukraine and Russia, they always warn the German side, and they say that the United States has a plan to deindustrialize Germany by hitting or damaging the relationship between Russia and Germany. Is this narrative plausible? Is it logical, or is it too early to judge, or it's mere conspiracy theory in your opinion?
It's already happening. The deindustrialization is a word that's been used by several, I think by a guy called Russwurm, who is the head of the BDI, which is the Federal Association of Industries. He has already warned of deindustrialization. There are other such individuals who are warning that the high energy prices are basically making production impossible for the energy intensive industries. They will try to leave the country, or they will try to redivert divestments into other countries for their future operations, and basically phase out more and more of their production sites in Germany. But the so-called small and family-owned businesses, some of them are large in terms of trade operations. They're really in a very terrible situation, because if the gas prices is quadrupling, or some of the gas prices are even 5 to 10 times higher than before, they have to stop producing. And it's very vital. The products that they're producing are very vital. They can be products such as fertilizers, etc., fertilizer products. So this is the deindustrialization, I think, has already begun, and this will drive a lot of investments in companies out of the high inflation and high energy price region and bring investments into other countries, including, of course, you were talking about the United States, including the United States, who have much lower energy prices, and they're now investing hundreds of billions in incentives for companies to relocate to the United States. A lot of people here are upset about it. So I don't think it's a conspiracy theory. I think you can actually witness it happening. But Germany, should stop acting as a victim of this. They should actually change it. I mean, there are ways of changing these policies. I mean, well, first of all, we should renegotiate energy cooperation with Russia. This is a thing that we could do. We could end these sanctions, even if this is very unlikely, but we could do it, and so on. We could go back to full reactivation of nuclear energy. We could scrap the so-called energy transition, which has been a miserable failure. The green policies are not only war policies. When it comes to foreign policy, they're also, literally war policies on the German economy, because they are making energy very expensive, and they are driving the whole country into ruin. They're also all the parties, the political system on the neoliberal side is saying we don't have money, for ordinary citizens. For example, also in England, or in France, we have hundreds of billions for upgrading our weapons and military systems, but we don't have enough to pay the workers and to pay for bridges and roads and railroads, etc. Entire energy, not only the energy, but the entire infrastructure that is keeping the physical economy alive is now in danger. So we have to completely turn around this whole ship.
Actually, just to end up this conversation, I think there are political forces in Germany, like the Greens. They aren't really unhappy with the current spike of the prices of the energy prices in Germany. There are these ideologues who are preaching for ideological fantasies for the future, completely getting rid of the fossil fuels and the gas, and they're gonna go more into green energy. And by 2030, you have this 2030 agenda of the UN. And the World Economic Forum is also directing all its efforts into this end goal. So it seems to me that the fate of the ordinary people, that especially in the middle class and the below middle class, will be in jeopardy. And these political forces, for their end goals, they are ready to sacrifice these ordinary people, especially those who are more vulnerable financially, in order to reach to the end goal by 2030. But at the same time, I also believe in physics, and I think also physics also plays some role in the social affairs, in political affairs, and every action has a reaction. And people could go really on a radical opposite side, but into radical opposite side of the Greens, and this could create also a social clash in Germany in the coming years if they don't really try to create a balance in their policies. This is just in my humble opinion. But Stephan Ossenkopp, I was really, really happy to chat with you about this case. You're a researcher at Schiller Institute. I learned a lot from you. I truly appreciate your insight. I'm sure the audience of Syriana Analysis also appreciate your analysis. Guys, the Twitter link of Stephan is in the description below. Please go and follow him. He is a researcher at the Schiller Institute, and he also lives in Berlin, where I live as well. Maybe in the coming days we could also meet for a coffee or so. Thank you, Stephan.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Guys, just before I end up this conversation, just to remind you again, the crowdfunding on GoFundMe.com has been suspended temporarily until I submit lots of documents that they asked for. I am bringing documents from humanitarian organizations in Syria and Lebanon that this money is going to these organizations and it will be distributed evenly among the people affected in Syria by this deadly earthquake. I'm not 100% optimistic that they will accept my appeal. I hope they do, but I'm not 100% sure. If it doesn't work, please type in the comments below what platform I can use to raise money for the people affected in Syria, and which platform isn't really submitting and following the American sanctions. Because, to be honest, most of the websites that I heard about, they're all following the American sanctions, the Caesar Act against Syria. And at the same time, the American officials come and say, no, we're not sanctioning the humanitarian sector. Humanitarian aid is allowed and everything, but when it comes to the reality and the truth on the ground, it's completely the opposite. So please name some genuine, good platforms in the comments below so that I can check. If they don't restore our campaign, they will restore all your money back. The platform will restore it in a matter of 2 weeks maximum, and then we can create another campaign on another platform, and we raise money again, because we collected 15,000, and I think we can reach at least 20,000 and send them to Syria. And see you soon.